The following is a special presentation of the Not Quite Right podcast, in which we discuss, in detail, entries to our erotic flash fiction competition, the Not Quite Right Prize for Flesh Fiction. This episode contains adult themes and is not appropriate for listeners under the age of 18. And Mum, if you're still listening, that's on you.
Something doesn't seem quite right.
Hi,
Hi,
my name's Ed.
and I'm Amanda.
Oh, did you think it was over?
Mm.
Did you think flesh fiction was over?
Uh-uh.
Well, not quite, because it's time for our Baredevils. And listen, we're not going to go easy on them.
Mm-mm.
We're going to ride them rough
Mhm.
and raw and painfully.
Listen, once again, I've never been more turned off in my life.
So listeners of the podcast will be very familiar with our Daredevil episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And when we talk about Daredevils, we normally like to say that they have the honour and the privilege of having their story eviscerated, ripped to shreds, annihilated, decimated. But our Baredevils are going to be perhaps penetrated. So we will be reading some very sexy stories. We'll be talking about the stories, breaking them down, sharing our thoughts. Hopefully we'll all learn something in the process. If not, we'll at least have a bit of fun.
I know I will.
So, a willing victim for this round.
I don't know. Is it a victim?
I think we're the victims.
I feel
to
like
be
the victim
honest.
a little. You know, as excited as I am to share this story with everyone, because I do think it is wonderful, I'm also a little bit nervous about reading it.
A little bit out of practice. It's been a while.
It has.
Our Baredevil, our very first Baredevil is Jenny E. And it's Jenny's first piece of erotic fiction, we've been told.
And that would be the case for a lot of our entrants, I feel. Just their first time venturing outside their comfort zone to write something saucy.
This story features in the kink and taboo category, which was one of the smaller categories, right? So there were only a few places really in the long list, so it was very hard fought. And unfortunately, this one didn't make the cut, but it came very close.
Very, very close.
So I think without further ado, let's read the damn story. Let's be uncomfortable for a little while,
Okay.
and then we'll come back and talk about it.
And the story is Voyeurism and Exhibitionism, HOA Approved, by Jenny E. Unmistakable moans and the rhythmic splashing of water on skin fills the air. From my second-floor balcony, I lean into the darkness, eyes scanning neighbouring backyards, searching for the source of pleasure spilling shamelessly into the night. I'm not proud of my regular voyeurism, but I'm not embarrassed either. Shame requires the energy of caring, and I am too tired for that most days. Too tired of being the tragic, too fragile to fuck neighbour. Widowed at 39 years old. Here in Seaside, backyards are more of a suggestion than a sanctuary. Small patches of grass are typically only occupied by mud-filled outdoor showers, built less for modesty and more for the desire not to trek sand into luxury beach homes. During the day, the showers serve their intended purpose, but this summer, without any obvious coordination, just after midnight, all visible from my back porch, a not-so-secret community of exhibitionists uses their showers for a very different purpose, each one hoping neighbours are watching and wanting. Tonight's groaning is closer than usual, and the scent of lavender soap permeates the air. It's been 4 weeks since the for sale sign vanished and the lights flickered on next door. Now, for the first time, there's movement. Steam rises from the outdoor shower, unveiling a solo body. His back is to me, one arm braced against the cedar wall as his other strokes up and down. Well, hello, new neighbour. The ocean breeze parts my white silk robe, exposing my unkempt pubic hair that hasn't seen a man up close since Jacob's boating accident 3 years ago. I sink into a wide, cushioned patio love seat, hungry for whatever tonight dares to reveal. Dancing string lights from the yellow house 2 doors down catch my eye. A man presses a woman against the shower wall and kisses her with desperate tenderness. My knees tremble watching them, remembering the feeling of skin on skin, of love. He lifts her and she instinctively wraps her legs around him. A few pelvic presses later, he loses his grip. They laugh. It's real, intimate, messy, and alive. I miss that. A steady patter of water comes from the brick house behind me. A new woman, a younger version of his wife with balloon-like tits, arches her back against the shower wall. The man, kneeling in front of her with his face buried between her legs, rocks his head in tune with her moans. She sees me watching, holds my gaze, and raises the pitch of her pleasure cries. I plunge my finger into my wetness and move with intentional thrust designed for a quick climax. Her likely fake, titillating moans change direction, seeking another's attention. Her eyes are on my new neighbour, and his eyes are on me. Still stroking, still too shy to show me all of him, but not enough to shift his line of sight. His pace quickens and his back muscles tighten. Leaning into the chaos of our unplanned orgy, I watch him while listening to her. Our synced, boisterous moans warn the neighbourhood we are about to climax. Loud whimpers simultaneously push from our 3 loins, shiver through our core, and exit our mouths, an unquestionable signal we are all thoroughly satisfied. He silences his shower. His eyes remain averted as he turns to grab his towel. His dick, proudly hanging to the centre of his thighs, glares at me, taunting me. Chiseled abs and defined quads serve as a background to his masterpiece. Who is he? 2 nights later, at 12:10 a.m., I rise from my balcony perch, peeling away the silk robe clinging to my humidity-drenched skin. A sharp breath escapes at the sight of a tall, recognisable manly silhouette with broad shoulders and defined arms standing in my yard. "Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you," he says with an unapologetic smile. "I'm Cooper. I just moved in next door. My towel blew off my deck into your yard. I was going to call out, but I didn't want to interrupt you." Blood rushes to my face. "So you just stood there watching?" I ask, taking a sip of my wine to gather my thoughts. He shrugs. "It's only fair considering you looked first." I nearly choke. Cooper continues, stepping close enough for me to smell his lavender body wash. "It's okay. Outdoor showers make good theatres. I like the show too." Half mortified, half delighted, I say, "You are very forward." "I'm a widower," he replies softly. "I've learned not to waste time." That news and its ensuing familiar silence swell between us. "Well, if your towel's still missing, let me know. I'll look in the morning. I'm Molly, by the way." I sit down, clambering for comfort. I will, he grins. And, Molly, if you ever feel like talking, I'm around. It's just me over there. He slips back into his house like a man who understands the art of good timing. I sit quietly, my heart unexpectedly light. 2 nights later, at 12:07 a.m., wiggling my toes in the dewy grass, I stare at the shower head hanging ominously, untouched since the summer of Jacob's death. Cobwebs thicker than the ones on my vagina hover in the corner. It's just a shower, I whisper. I turn the water on and let my robe slip off my body. Warm water slides down my spine, its heat loosening the tense anger I've perfected over these last years. I rake my fingers through my hair, slicking it back. Curtains move in dimly lit windows. Is it the wind? Or are they watching? I turn, presenting myself. I want them to watch. This is for no one. For everyone. For me. Moonlight spills across my breasts as I lather them, caress them, grazing nipples made hard by my own hands. There is something bold and wickedly delightful in this act. Not because it's sexual, but because it's my moment. A small taste of freedom from despair. I bite my lip, slide my middle finger down to my clit, tracing tight circles ever so slowly. Timidity, sadness, confidence and excitement swirl like static, but my skilled finger, now pulsating like a high-end vibrator, cuts through the chaos. Eagerness takes hold. I slip my finger in and out as the palm of my hand repeatedly rubs my clit, seeking a slow and rewarding return. My body quivers from head to toe. 2 nights later, at 11:55 p.m., a soft clink chimes on my patio table. I move the curtains slightly and see a glass of wine with a note tucked under. Cooper is already walking back to his yard, wearing only white linen pants and a smug grin. I wait until he disappears and slip out the door to read the note. Enjoy the wine. This is my favourite Zinfandel. You missed a good one last night. Couple in the tan house. Handcuffs. I laugh aloud for the first time in years as I walk back into the house and curl up in bed. Consumed by a single thought, I fuck my clit, purposely imagining someone who isn't Jacob. 2 nights later, at 9:15 p.m. Knock knock. Cooper is standing at the door, dripping wet, holding a grocery bag. Looks like the rain is putting a damper on tonight's entertainment, and I can't eat this tub of ice cream alone. We sit by the back window, and with each lightning flash I catch a clearer glimpse of his telling smile lines. So, how are you liking the new house? I ask. It's different, which is what I needed. Feels good. Did the move help you get over her? It hasn't erased the pain, but it's given me a new sense of hope. It's like a spark ignited. He holds my arm. letting me know he's ready for more. I'm not. The next night at 11:59 p.m, another note sits on my back table. I haven't stopped thinking about you. Come join me. Not for a new beginning, just for a moment in time with an open ending. I hover at the edge of my porch, clenching the stairs railing. The air is thick with salt and silence. My bare feet sink into the cold stairs and wood creaks under me. Each step down is slow and deliberate, as if every descent is a choice I've been putting off for years. Next door, the steady rush of a shower hammering against rocky surfaces blends with the pounding of my heart, both echoing in the stillness of the night. Steam curls into the night, veiling the outlines of his body, but not quite enough. I drop my robe and step inside the shower without a word. Cooper turns entirely towards me. Our eyes meet, and I feel that same bothersome excitement that has been on my mind for days. As the water engulfs me, I let go of everything I've been trying to put behind me, and it washes down the drain.
So thank you, Jenny E, for your sexy story.
I need a shower, Jenny.
Oh. An outdoor shower, perhaps.
Specifically.
So before we get into the story, we actually had a chat with Elise, our guest judge for the category, who shared their thoughts about the story. So we will play that discussion now. Hello, Elise.
Hi.
Tell us your thoughts about this story.
I really enjoyed this story. The premise of it was a lot of fun for me. I have never been to a physical community of voyeurists and exhibitionists, but I've known groups or communities of voyeurists and exhibitionists who get together and do like little kink parties. So seeing it taken to the next level was really enjoyable for me. This is, though, a Baredevil, right? So I'm not supposed to be all bubbly and kind.
Yeah, we don't go easy on our Baredevils. But you bring that up, and it's interesting because Ed's initial comments on this story after reading your comments was like, hang on, what? These communities exist? I've been living in the wrong area my whole life.
Yeah, I wasn't sure based on your comment are these established communities solely for this purpose, or are they little sub-communities that arise out of existing locations where people who live there are on the same wavelength?
I would assume the latter, because I have not run across a community where it's like the ethos of the community that everyone like goes outside and, you know, engages in exhibitionist sexual activities. So what I am much more familiar with is where a person who's kinky and has maybe a house or a property that's like expansive or private enough will have a party and everyone will come over. And so there's munches, which are vanilla-friendly parties where anybody is welcome and you can come to the... It sounds naughty, but it's not. It's the one that's not naughty. You go to a munch to learn about the kink lifestyle and to meet kinky people. And there might be people like in a collar or leash or like in a corseted up or wearing the boots or whatever, but there's not going to be any like really hardcore kink going on at a munch. You're not going to like see blood play or anything like that. Wow. But then once you're in the community, then you can get invited to kinky parties that have themes to them, or maybe are just like a place where everyone can go for an evening or a weekend and just kind of let loose.
What you're trying to say is that these munch parties are like an amuse-bouche.
Yes, it's right. It's a cheeky little munch.
But tell us your thoughts on this story in particular as well. So I know Jenny was keen for your feedback.
Yeah. So one of the things that I really loved was the way that the voyeurism and exhibitionism piece of the story was almost like a character. The individual participants in this community didn't really flesh out as separate rich characters for me. And with more space, that's something I really would have loved to see. But the main purpose of the community was a vehicle for the healing journey of this character. So, like so many kinky people, there's like a healing arc embedded in the kink. Yeah. And for her, it was like releasing was kind of her core theme. And I felt like the role that the other exhibitionists and voyeurists in the community were playing for her was holding that space so that the slow releasing became possible. There were very specific moments of vulnerability for her in the times that she was watching, like the moment where it says he lifts her and she instinctively wraps her legs around him. A few pelvic presses later, he loses his grip and they laugh. And this moment of like, you know, sex isn't always perfect. It's not like the way that we remember when we're grieving. It's sloppy and awkward and damp. And that I almost said
that's hot.
Moist.
Moist, exactly. No, you're right. I think that moment resonated with me as well. Like, you know, and I think the words are used there. It's real. Yeah. It's not all the fantasy. There's like human connection that happens in that moment. And I thought that was conveyed very well in this story. And I did get that sort of emotional punch from that moment in the story.
I did too. I did wish, so the character has like this journey of releasing, and the latter half of the journey is sort of facilitated through her attraction to and eventually her, I assume, sex with Cooper. And I like that. Where I really struggled with this story was that I didn't feel as though at the end, the sort of like, and then all of my issues washed down the drain piece was a very satisfying resolution. Because at least for me, grief is so much more complex than that. And kink can be so much more complex than that. So this vehicle gives you a lot of room to play with the pieces of that are carried and then the pieces of it that are released. And maybe it was an issue of word count, because that is a pretty big ask for such a short. I would have loved to see, there were a couple of spots where like the second to last paragraph, Cooper turns entirely toward me, our eyes meet, and I feel that same bothersome excitement that has been on my mind for days. And I love the sense of conflictedness in that word, bothersome. But if the next line that is like, I let go of everything I've been trying to put behind me and it all washes down the drain, I feel like that moment of opportunity that is offered by the word bothersome, or even a more evocative and powerful word like traitorous, if that's how she's feeling, could have lent a lot more ambiguity and complexity to that moment. And so instead of giving us kind of like an uncomplicated HEA, we could have had something a little more subtle and nuanced. I would have loved to see that.
I agree very strongly with you. I think for me, and Ed and I might talk about it in more detail a bit later as well, but that final line I found quite unsatisfying. I have my own grief. It's not this kind of grief. I haven't lost a partner, but I have experienced quite significant grief. And I think this idea of washing it down the drain didn't resonate with me. From my perspective, that's not what you do with a profound grief. It never washes down the drain. It's always with you. And I think there were other options there. I think the sentiment was right. You know, this idea of like, I've been holding on to all this stuff. And the idea is that she wants to release it. And I think that sentiment is good. And that's a powerful and resonant sentiment. And in that moment, I think it's just that metaphor of washing down the drain that didn't quite land for me. And it sounds like it didn't quite land for you either, Elise, and that maybe there was another metaphor. And, you know, in this story, we do talk about the steam as well, the steam of the shower. Like that grief might be the steam, like it's there, but you can't quite grasp at it. Like there are other metaphors that I think might have lent into that release without giving this idea of, oh, well, it's all just gone now and disappeared and we don't see it ever again, which is what I would associate with something washing down the drain.
There are some moments of rigidness too. There's the cobwebby vagina that's like essentially locked away, and there are other moments where the overarching experience that I get of the main character is this rigidness or this being like locked down or locked away. And I feel like if you're exploring relief and you're really attached to that drain metaphor, instead of everything being released, just the resistance to moving forward would be a really beautiful, you know, the feeling that sadness still, and maybe even feeling that twinge of traitorousness still, but also finally like relaxing into that moment. about halfway through, there's a line, he holds my arm, letting me know he's ready for more. I'm not. And that's another moment where like the abruptness of that statement and then the transition to the next night being like, oh yeah, okay, now I am.
Yeah.
I wasn't, but now I am. Feels maybe like another opportunity to have more vulnerability and uncertainty.
Yeah, I think you're right. And you're right that it's, it's a short story. In fact, in my comments, I was saying this would make an amazing novel. And some stories are too big for the word count. I think this story did well within the word count. I think it's probably a big ask to, ask it to do everything. And it's the conflict, this inner conflict of I want this, but I don't want this, or I want this, but I'm not ready for it. And it's such an important emotion to explore. And I think that Jenny does that really well here. But yeah, we don't ever quite get the opportunity to really delve into it because we're kind of at this surface level and jumping from moment to moment.
But I love how you frame that about I want this, but I don't want it, because that is such a core aspect of the kink experience for so many people. Like, I want to feel shame because then I can release it. So I need someone to shame me.
Okay.
You see? But I don't actually like to be shamed. I just need the release of being shamed, that kind of dynamic. I think particularly with the voyeurist and exhibitionist, the being seen and the seeing piece and the sort of wanting and not wanting piece, there's so much opportunity to explore how incomplete grieving always is, like forever. You never are done with it. It's more about learning to live with the feeling of that empty spot where something used to be and learning to carry it and move forward with it and eventually take comfort in it instead of just letting it be washed off.
I think as an extension of that, there's a line in the story, and it's a line of dialogue, where they're talking about him moving into this community. And she says to him, "Did the move help you get over her?" And he says, "It hasn't erased the pain, but it has given me a new sense of hope. It's like a spark ignited." And again, I think that's a nice sentiment, but at the same time, that really didn't quite hit home for me. She's experiencing her own grief. And when she says, "Did the move help you get over her?" I just can't imagine that being something someone who has experienced grief would say. You don't ever get over that person, in my view. That's not what you're seeking. What you're seeking is to move on with life without them, but not to ever kind of forget they existed or get over them like you might an ex, for example. So I think there was this kind of disconnect a little bit for me between what I experienced as a real sense of grief and what was being expressed in this story as how grief might play out in this situation. So that's me as a reader. I can only speak to my own reaction to what's happening in this story, and that's not everybody's reaction, but I think that's the same thing that I was kind of reacting to in that final moment as well, around it washing down the drain, and just feeling like that's not really how that feels for me. And again, I'm not talking about a partner in my situation, but it's still that same sense of carrying grief with you through life.
We talk a lot about flash fiction, of having character change and character development and kind of sticking the landing. I think there is like a desire to end your story with like something significant happening. But maybe when you're dealing with such a complex emotion like grief, you need to give it a little bit more space and not closing out on a definite decision. It can be just a small point of change rather than a large point of change.
So this is definitely not something you could fit in 1,500 words, but it would be such a fascinating character flaw if the main character's core issue is the inability to see that nuance. And so she's been locked into like rage and misery for 3 years, which we get that piece of information fairly early on. And the reason she's stuck is because she sees it as all or nothing. Then this moment in the story where she's like, and all my grief washed down the drain, would be like that midpoint false high where she would be like, I feel great. And then she would go home and like sob into her pillow and get absolutely hammered and then not be able to look the guy in the eye the next day. Like that would be really interesting. But that's a novel now.
And, that's not particularly helpful when we're trying to tell a story in 1,500 words. And I have to say, I think this story was beautiful in 1,500 words. Like I think it's telling that we all want more of it, and that I said, like, I'd love to read this novel. Like, I think that expresses something about the characters, wanting more is pretty strong praise of a 1,500 word story.
I want to ask as well, Elise, just around, apologies, but I keep coming back to this idea of these voyeuristic and exhibitionist communities. I'm fascinated by this idea. When I think about voyeurism and exhibitionism, normally it's like there is the voyeur and there is the exhibitionist. In this story, there are people, in fact, the main character, taking on both the role of the voyeur and the exhibitionist. I just wanted to ask, in your experience, how common that is? Is it more the case where people might exhibit traits of both, or they might be heavily one or the other?
I've seen plenty of examples of both, and actually really liked that about this story because the main character's movement through the process of starting out as solely a voyeur and then moving towards becoming exhibitionist also, that's so complicated and lovely, and it's such a great opportunity to explore what the character's arc really looks like. And I also thought that the complexity of some of those voyeuristic moments, there was like a woman with very large breasts that like is staring at the man who's staring at the main character who is staring at the woman with the very large breasts, and they're having this moment of all of them navigating their own stuff. And that's like the thing, the way the line between voyeurism and exhibitionism can often become kind of blurry is when you're receiving the experience of being perceived and like even maybe being judged and then kind of getting a thrill from like knowing that you're breaking norms or expectations or that someone is wanting you and can't have you or whatever it is that's exciting to you about that part of the process. And then also having that power of perceiving someone else and knowing that they have no control over what's in your mind and they're aware of that and that your gaze is influencing their experience. So there are not a ton of very straightforward dynamics in kink. There's a lot of this sort of mashing together of like having power and by having it also losing power, which I think is one of the things that's so appealing to people about it. But certainly there are like pure voyeurs and there are pure exhibitionists. In those cases, you'll often find yourself in situations where consent is a little more complicated though, because like it's pretty common for consent not to be considered by voyeurist or exhibitionist like scenes.
Yeah, it's not a form of consent. And I think when we were reading these stories and I saw your comments on this, Elise, it was the first time I'd really thought about that voyeuristic consent, just because it's not something that people are taught and it's not something that people really are forced to consider in their daily life. Like most sexual activities behind closed doors, and we focus on consent between one person and another within that activity. Yeah, there's a whole other world outside of that, which
you're coming back to that other world again. He's like, where's my invitation is I think the subtext
where's
of that.
Where's the domain.com.au for that?
But I do think that was navigated well in this story. Like, to be very clear, everybody in this story is clearly happy with what's going on. So that was not an issue here.
That was something I actually really liked about it because it's sort of like this acknowledged ethos of the community that you go outside to your outdoor shower when you want to participate in that like group exhibitionist and voyeurist behavior. Ed, there is I don't know if people who are not kinky know this, but there's a thing called FetLife, which is essentially like Facebook for kinky people. Most people have a thing up there saying like, if you're doing a research paper, you're not welcome here. But if you're just curious, you absolutely are welcome. You're welcome to join and you're welcome to ask questions, and people put up photographs of stuff. And so like if you want to learn more, FetLife is a great place to do that.
Right. Fascinating.
His fingers are twitching right now. He wants to run over to the computer.
No, look, just more curious than anything. It's a world that I haven't been exposed to, so to speak. And
pay the jar. Where's your dollar?
Yeah, I've got $1 right here.
So, Elise, was there anything else you wanted to share? Any other thoughts about this story?
Yeah, so I made a lot of critique here, but I loved this story. I think I even did a shout out about it because I loved it so much. So it's one of those that stuck with me, and I was really excited that there was a Baredevil on it, and then even more excited that I got to come and talk about it because it's full of all of these really terrific moments. There's a moment where Cooper comes over and then he just kind of is like, I'm around, and then he leaves. And she's like, he slips back into the house like a man who understands the art of good timing. And like the layers of that moment made me so happy. The layers of meaning in that were just beautiful to me. So there's tons to love here. I don't want to be leaving the impression that I didn't. And honestly, just about everything to do with the kink I loved.
Yeah, it was definitely a fun and eye-opening, we keep saying, category to read. This story there probably weren't a lot of this kind of voyeurism and exhibitionism. There were a few, but like not a lot. And it was probably like the standout in that sense. And yeah, we're excited to publish this story as well. So this will be featuring in one of our flesh fiction volumes.
Well, thank you so much for joining us again, Elise. And no doubt it won't be the last time.
Always a joy.
So thanks again, Elise. That was a lovely chat. We talked a lot about the themes in that chat and kind of the emotional experience. But I think Jenny's also interested to know a bit more about the writing as well, like the nuts and bolts of the storytelling.
And Jenny sent us a voicemail as well, so we'll play that now.
Hi, Amanda and Ed. It's Jenny E., and I'm really excited and also nervous to be a Baredevil. This is my first time writing erotica, so I really leaned into my research, which said that I should have the plot revolve around the sex scenes, not the other way around. But in doing that, I worry that maybe the conflict and tension are too subtle, so I'd love your take on that. Another thing I know I struggle with, because my beta readers tell me so, is that I don't trust my audience. But I don't really recognize when I'm over-explaining, so I'd love help spotting where I could use more subtext. And lastly, I already know I'm going to cringe when you read my timestamp scene breaks out loud. So any tips on moving time forward in a less sort of clunky way, less, now it's 2 days later at midnight, would be amazing. Finally, just a big thanks for the Flesh Fiction Prize opportunity. Through my writing, I've tried to normalize sex for women over 40. I do this because too often I feel like we're overlooked or we're flattened into the Mrs. Robinson trope. And I want to show that women over 40 like sex and yes, maybe they masturbate, and that's very normal. And, they have the right to claim what makes them feel sexy, whatever that means, without feeling embarrassed or like they need to give an explanation. And I hope this story accomplishes that. I'll be listening to your podcast with my girlfriends and a bunch of wine, so don't feel guilty about roasting me. I have my girls to support me. Cheers.
So thank you, Jenny, for your questions. And some great questions there.
Yeah.
We'll get into some of the specifics as we go through the story. But maybe to address some of those more general questions, I find the first one fascinating around, do you prioritize the sex or the plot? Do you have thoughts about that, Amanda?
I do, and I think my thoughts stem from reading so many of these stories. Yeah. And I would say the stories that I guess rose to the top in this competition are probably ones that prioritize the storytelling over the sex. There were stories that weren't particularly erotic. If we talk about, we have mentioned this before, like they're not getting you off. They're not turning you on. They're just great stories involving or incorporating sex. But then there were also stories that were just really hot and we loved them for that reason, but they still had to be well written and well constructed for it to rise to the top in a competition. And we're talking about a competition setting, not like you're on your own in your bedroom at home and you just want a story to get you off. We're talking about a writing competition. So it's kind of like a different audience. So I think there's a few different things at play there. I mean, I would say I always love storytelling, and I don't think the two have to, it's not like you have to choose one or the other. I think you can have both.
It's definitely not a one or the other situation. I think you need both really to make it work. What I think that Jenny's done really well here is keep the sex throughout the story. And I think I may have commented on this in one of our Flesh Fiction episodes, is that the stories that worked especially well for me were the ones that maintained that voice and that mood all the way through. Yeah. Like it wasn't set up, sex scene, denouement situation, right? You get into it straight into like that sexual mindset and it builds and it develops, but you're always kind of in that headspace. This story does that really well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is probably a prime example of that where those two things are balanced. And, you could always have more story. You could always do more on everything. And we will get into our critiques of like what more you could do and the opportunities here. But I did think there was a really nice balance of what was sexy and a turn on and then what was like compelling and emotionally resonant and interesting and engaging, all those aspects of storytelling. And I think this is a great example. And I mean, that's why it's going to be published, right? We're going to publish this one. I think it's a beautiful story in many ways and it's also really hot. So really, I think you ticked both boxes there.
Ticking both boxes. Wow. Yes. Yeah, one thing I'll add as well, because Jenny mentioned about the timestamps, and I think this is something that distracts me when we talk about flash fiction competitions, especially 500 words, having kind of split scenes in 500 words, I feel is a distraction and an opportunity to consolidate and to streamline often. In this story, I felt that didn't distract me at all.
No.
And I actually really liked that about this story, that it had that kind of lingering quality of just like there's a lot of space around what was happening. Like it was just snippets. It also kind of put you in the mood of this main character, obviously living her life in this community. And this is just like this brief moment of excitement that happens in the evening, right? And the rest of the time she's probably dealing with whatever normal stuff that she has to deal with, and on top of that, her grief. But what we get are those moments of excitement, and knowing that they are so spread apart, like 2 days later, this other little moment, and 2 days later, this other little moment. It's like this, it's a bit of a tease. And I think that works really well in this context. And I can't think of a better way of doing that, right? Apart from just a simple timestamp, 2 days later. For me, that was fairly seamless.
Yeah, I actually wanted to say that too. Like, I think, like you say, we talk about just have a single scene. I mean, that's in a 500-word story. I wouldn't necessarily say a 1,500-word story needs to be a single scene. You've got all that extra room. But I actually thought this is a perfect example of how to do that well. So I don't know if you might be surprised to hear that, Jenny. You're sort of saying it was clunky. I disagree. Like, I think you handled it very well. And I guess for those who are, less experienced with it, maybe one way of thinking about it is if you were telling your best friend this story about this hot guy who moved in next door, what are you keeping in and what are you leaving out, right? You're just keeping in the highlights. You're just saying, and then 2 nights later he was like, blah, right? You're not saying, and anyway, I went to the shops and I did my groceries and time passed and, I had a sleep. No, ditch that and just skip to the next bit. And when we're having a conversation, we don't care. We're not wondering what happened in those 2 days. We don't care. We're just like, yep, what next? And I think stories like this that span these time jumps, much as we might advise against them in a 500-word story most of the time, not all the time, but when they do work is when we're keeping this thread of the story that's being told. So in this case, the thread and the theme is this outdoor shower stuff and this relationship that's building with this neighbour. We don't need anything else. But as you say, it's important to show that passage of time because it wouldn't have that same emotional resonance if he just turned up and was like, hey, let's fuck. Okay, let's do it. And I think that was maybe a shortcoming of some of the other stories we talked about where there was no build-up, there was no climax. Everyone's just into it from the start. And while that might be a really great experience in real life, it makes for a less satisfying story. And so I think that conflict, the tension, the him kind of being prepared to walk away and come back and wait a couple of nights and all of that leads to this extra punch at the end when she finally gets what she wants.
Yeah, and I think it's a real challenge as well that Jenny has executed really well is being able to sit in that emotional complexity of that character, the grief they're dealing with, all of the conflicting emotions that they're dealing with in terms of like, do I want to let go of this previous partner? Do I want to say yes to this thing that's coming towards me?
Looming.
Exactly. While keeping it sexy and while keeping it embedded in that emotion. Because I think that is important for an erotic story as well, is not getting too deep into the sad stuff.
Yeah.
It is possible. It does change the tone of the story. And we did have some category winners that were very sad and kind of were in that emotion. But I think if you do want to keep it a turn on kind of thing, then you do want to sit with that emotion a little bit more than you do those negative emotions.
Yeah. No, I agree. And, you can have that push and pull and that's where the conflict comes in. But we don't want it to be the overriding feeling. We don't want readers to be sad as they're reading about this steamy shower scene. We want readers to feel that relief that she's feeling and that kind of like letting go and all of that. That's the emotion that we're going for. And I think that's what this story does build towards. We've got that tension. We've got that feeling of her being constrained, as Elise pointed out as well. And then we build to this point where she lets it go. Yeah. And that's the whole point of this story. And I think that was a powerful aspect of this story, that emotional release on top of what was also just a really hot scene.
Yeah, I think it's a really compelling premise as well because as I've mentioned several times, I think in the discussion with Elise and earlier, as a premise, I found this really interesting. And then on top of that, you've layered an actual character with actual conflict and all of that kind of thing. So all of those things are really working for you there. So before we get into a little bit more detail about the story, just to address the theme response here, and the theme, of course, making the unsexy irresistible. So I guess the unsexy thing in this story was probably grief.
It's interesting that you say that, okay, because we had to guess.
Yeah.
Jenny didn't put an explanation in the brief explanation field, and so Elise had guessed, like you had, that it was the grief over the death of a spouse. That was the unsexy thing. I came in later and I was like, I'm not sure if that's it. Maybe it's this homeowners association thing, right? Because I know that's it's not a thing here in Australia, but we're very familiar with the homeowners association issues that you might have. We have strata issues here in Australia, and they're very similar. But yeah, like we were guessing. And in fact, Jenny clarified subsequently, once everything was revealed, that in fact her inspiration was that it was outdoor showers.
Oh, really?
That were the unsexy thing. And look, speaking as an Australian, I'm not sure I find outdoor showers unsexy.
Do you think it's a climate thing?
Maybe it's a climate thing. It's like,
they're quite nice.
On my honeymoon, I went to Thailand where they have outdoor showers, and it's a pretty sexy place. Anyway.
And there was this whole community of outdoor showers there. It was really
fascinating. But yeah, I don't know that I would call an outdoor shower particularly unsexy. Where we live on the coast, they're a thing that you have. You rinse off after the beach, and I'm not like looking out the window with my binoculars at them. But it's interesting that Jenny would be inspired by that.
Yeah, look, I'm agnostic as to that. But there's a couple of other things, as you mentioned, the HOA also in the title and the grief. So certainly there were things in here that are unsexy, whatever your thoughts are about outdoor showers. So the title of the story is Voyeurism and Exhibitionism, HOA Approved. Do you have any thoughts?
I do. I would say a tick in the pro column is that it was very memorable. The voyeurism and exhibitionism core theme.
Yeah.
So to have that in the title is like, yep, I remember that story straight away. Yeah. I would say the challenge for me is that the tone isn't right. I feel like it's a little comedic almost, like this whole HOA thing, like we know that that's ripe with drama, and I'm not sure that tone is where the story went. And so I would challenge the title. I would say I think although it was memorable, it doesn't emotionally or tonally fit the story that follows. But nevertheless, it was memorable and allowed us to, I guess, recall the story in our minds, which is a big tick, really.
All right, so let's move on to the story. Look, with these Baredevils, we're not going to go through line by line because there are many more lines than what we normally have. But we will, I guess, maybe call out some highlights. Do we want to talk about the opening?
Yeah.
So the opening line, unmistakable moans and the rhythmic splashing of water on skin fills the air. From my second floor balcony, I lean into the darkness, eyes scanning neighbouring backyards, searching for the source of pleasure spilling shamelessly into the night. I do love the idea of that pleasure spilling shamelessly into the night. It's a great image.
I think that the opening paragraphs together, all of them, do a great job of putting us right in the context. Like we talk about dropping into the scene as the story begins, and I think this story does that very well. It's clear, we know what we're looking at, and it sets the tone as well, this sexy tone that continues throughout the story.
Yeah, and we're not caught up in backstory here. We're right in the moment, which is great.
And another thing worth pointing out is also the sensory experience there. Like we're talking about sounds, we're talking about the sights, and you get that sense almost of the time and even the season. Like I was sort of in there in the season as well with this, even though it's not actually mentioned. Just this idea of seaside, we kind of got that cool summer evening vibe to it.
And also this idea of wetness as well, which is all the way through. We're in showers, we're showering every night, and that's the focus. So straight away in the first line, like we're wet, basically, to put it one way.
Let's go. So yeah, I would say it's actually a great setup and a little bit voicey as well. We're starting to get this character's voice in there, which I liked. One challenge I would say is maybe, and this is probably something I would say throughout the story, is that I think some of these sentences could have been finessed a little bit. So as an overarching comment, it's great. We're heading in the right direction. We're getting sensory detail. It's clear. We know what's happening. But some of the sentences, the cadence of them or just some of the word choices didn't quite land in as satisfying a way as they might have. And I'll use the first line as an example. So we've got unmistakable moans and the rhythmic splashing of water on skin fills the air. Now, we've got fills, but it's actually plural items. So it should really be unmistakable moans and the rhythmic splashing of water on skin fill the air. Yep. And I know that's a tiny little thing, but it's also your first sentence. Yeah. And so I do think some of that finesse in terms of like word choice and just getting it right, getting right down to the exact word that you're looking for. And I think some of these sentences are either maybe a little bit overlong or sort of the words could have been reorganized to just create that smooth reading experience. I think you want to avoid tripping readers up at any point. I don't want to belabor that. I think that's something, if you read it out loud to yourself, you could pick up things that just didn't quite ring right in your ear, or if you share it with friends who are good at picking up on the little detail. But I'm talking little detail here, not like big issues, just kind of like that final little polish that would go on the story.
Are you like me when you write these stories? Because I remember when I was revising my flesh fiction story, I would read these paragraphs over and over and over and over and over and over and over so many times and tweak word after word after word. And I'm never sure if, like, am I fixing it or am I sucking all of the energy out of the story?
I think that's a common problem for people who get stuck into editing. You can go too far. You absolutely can go too far. And as the author, you don't know when it's too far.
Yeah.
Because you've still got the old tone in your head. You're not coming at it for the first time, missing all of that. It's all still lingering. So I think the only answer to that is a good beta reader. If you've got someone who can pick up that shit for you, that is so valuable because it's almost impossible to do it yourself. I will say reading it out loud to yourself is one way to pick it up. Another way to pick up little details if you've looked at a story way too many times is to change the font. Change the font, it's like your brain picks it up for the first time. So that's a good way to pick up errors if you're just working solo. Just to give another couple of examples about that finessing thing here. So we have a couple of paragraphs down. Small patches of grass are typically only occupied by mud-filled outdoor showers, built less for modesty and more for the desire not to trek sand into luxury beach homes. Now, to me, all the sentiment there is great, but it's a bit of a mouthful of a sentence. And when you're reading that, it's just sort of a lot to take in at once. A good rule of thumb is to sort of top out at about 25 words in a sentence. And that's not like a rule. You can absolutely do more than that. But in terms of clarity and flow for the reader, these longer sentences can sometimes trip you up. And I think at all times you want people to just be flowing with the reading. So that was a sentence I thought could have maybe been split up or just reorganized so that the words flowed. And then the following paragraph has another really long sentence. So we have, but this summer, without any obvious coordination, just after midnight, all visible from my back porch, a not-so-secret community of exhibitionists uses their showers for a very different purpose, each one hoping neighbours are watching and wanting. Now, when you read that for the first time, your brain's ready to finish that sentence a little bit sooner. It's just a little bit tricky for people to embrace all of that on the first read. So again, I'd just say break it up.
Yeah, look, I don't necessarily have a problem with long sentences. It's a question of readability, really, isn't it? Like, they do take a little bit of concentration to kind of tease apart. And sometimes the order in which the items are presented, like we're talking about small patches of grass, and then we kind of move into other ideas. So it's just where you're taking the reader and where you're making your reader look at every moment in time. I don't necessarily think it's a major issue, though, because it's also part of voice and part of the tone for a story. So you can definitely use longer sentences to achieve a certain style.
I totally agree. You absolutely need to be able to make stylistic choices like that. I'm just not sure in this case that that's a stylistic choice that's adding value. In my mind, you're saying give that extra character voice. I'm not sure these sentences are doing that. I don't think they're contributing to voice. I think they are potentially tripping a reader up. But look, again, you said it's not a big thing. It's not. I'm talking finesse. I'm talking final polish. So these things aren't things that would make me say, oh, I don't like this story by any means, but it might be something that stands between you and that next level. You know, we're talking high level like that. This story was cut from the long list. Like maybe it is little things like that stand in the way.
Yeah, but what I do love about this opening sequence is it does feel quite efficient, right? If we look through paragraph by paragraph, each paragraph does have a clear express purpose. There's not much fluff in terms of what's being stated here. We're setting the scene, we're introducing our main character, we're giving a little bit of backstory. And I do like in that second paragraph, we get straight into the voyeurism. What does that mean for the character? And straight away, I think in those words, I'm not proud of my regular voyeurism. I'm not embarrassed either. Shame requires the energy of caring. We find out about her very quickly and then we move on, right? But the little bit we find out about her is the most important information. The fact that like she's a relatively young widow. She feels like she's too fragile to fuck. And, and I think that's all we really need to kind of put ourselves in her mind for the rest of the story.
Absolutely. I think it's a great bit of setup.
And also we get very shortly after this is 5 paragraphs in, well, hello, new neighbour. And that's the moment that we really kind of introduce what is the plot element that will play out in the rest of the story.
That's the dramatic question, right? Like,
yeah.
do they fuck? And that's great, like getting that up front there. You could possibly tighten some of that opening. I think it's, if you will.
How tight?
But, it's pretty good. It's doing its job there. It's all on the first page in the version we've printed here. It's all happening. So I think that's great. Jenny raised a point in her earlier questions, which was around her beta readers giving her some feedback to say maybe she's not trusting her reader enough and maybe being a little bit too explicit with some of this stuff, not explicit in a sexy sense, but explicit in a over-explaining sense perhaps. And I guess in response to that, I just wanted to raise this sentence here, which is, the ocean breeze parts my white silk robe, exposing my unkempt pubic hair that hasn't seen a man up close since Jacob's boating accident 3 years ago. And again, that's another sentence I would say that's maybe quite a bit and might need a little bit of finesse. But also if we're looking at an editing point, I don't know that we need to mention Jacob's boating accident. It feels like a bit of a non sequitur. Even though it's highly relevant, it's also not.
It's not really relevant how he died.
And we already know. We already know he has died. And so I feel like that extra detail kind of took me out of that a little bit.
I don't mind the detail of the unkempt pubic hair.
It's more the moment.
I think the point of this paragraph is to emphasise that it's been a while for our protagonist here, which it does. But if we're taking it from a first-person perspective, that's not necessarily the thought process that I would imagine that she's going through. Opening her robe because she's feeling turned on, and then touching her pubic hair, and then remembering about the boating accident.
Look, it's possible. And I think to some extent, like we are playing into that conflict here of what she's thinking about, what she wants versus what she's stuck in emotionally. But just from a reading perspective, I would say it's just, like I said, a little bit of a non sequitur, and it kind of just didn't feel comfortable. And I would say all you need to change it to is hasn't seen a man up close since Jacob.
Yeah.
And that's enough. And look, we're talking about minor details here, but Jenny did ask about, am I trusting my audience, not trusting my audience? And I think maybe that was a little bit too much spoon feeding. We don't need that information. And look, in this opening, I think it's okay to be more direct in the opening, and sometimes I would encourage it. We talk a lot about don't leave the mystery. We don't want a mystery in a story. We need to be able to connect with the characters right up front. Yeah. Not never a mystery, but not a mystery about what's happening. Yeah. It's very clear what's happening, and I think that's appropriate for this stage of the story. But I did think that there were some times where there was a bit of telling going on in the story that could have been replaced by more dramatization. So we'll talk about those as well. But that was just one example early on, I guess, that stood out to me. Another sort of overarching point I wanted to make, and this is something that's been coming up for me as I've been editing some of the stories for our collection, is this idea, and we've talked about it before, of never naming an emotion. So that's a subset of show don't tell, I guess. And I think there were some times throughout the story where perhaps the emotions were just stated instead of being shown. I'll just throw a couple of examples out there. We've got a man presses a woman against the shower wall and kisses her with a desperate tenderness. I don't necessarily think that's a problem, but I guess the gold standard is show us the kiss.
Yeah.
What does he do that is desperate and tender at the same time? Describe the kiss without telling us the conclusion that we're supposed to reach about that action. Another example, half mortified, half delighted, I say, you are very forward. I would potentially suggest replacing that with an action beat. What's she doing in that moment? She's half mortified, half delighted. What's her body language, or what action is she taking in that moment? We've got, I sit down clambering for comfort. What does that look like? How is she sitting down? Is she gripping the armrest, And this might be, Jenny, those opportunities where your beta readers are saying, trust the reader. Yeah. It's like, trust the reader to know that when she grips the armrest of her chair and lowers herself down, that what she's doing is searching for comfort there, And
I think it bears repeating. We do talk about this rule quite often, don't name an emotion. And sometimes these rules can feel arbitrary, but they're not. And they're grounded in, I guess, psychology, because when we as people observe other people, we can see what they're feeling in the way that they act. We can see when someone's nervous. We can see when someone's angry. That's just like a intuition that we build up over years of interacting with people. And so when we read that in a story and we hear about how a character is behaving, we naturally want to put those things together and come to our own conclusions about what that might mean. And when we're told what they're feeling, it can kind of feel like something's been taken away from us as readers.
And, you know, that intuition doesn't come naturally for everyone, but I think that's something always to strive for. I think in your first draft, when you go back and you look, anytime I've named an emotion, it's an opportunity to give us body language, dialogue, or action instead. And it's not always necessary. You know, there'll be times when it's enough to just say what the feeling was and we move on, and because it's not important enough emotion for us to fully dramatize out, and we just want to skip over it and sort of be clear. But there's other times, and there's certainly times in a piece of erotic fiction where it's the action, dialogue, and body language that should be doing the talking and not the narrator. So just an opportunity there. I didn't find it to be particularly distracting in this story, I have to say, but going over it with a fine-tooth comb with an editor's mindset, I would be saying opportunity, opportunity, opportunity to just level that up a little bit. And similarly, I think sometimes when we summarize action, we can miss that opportunity to really give the reader the picture as well. And again, look, we can't show everything or we'll never leave, you know, we'll run out of words pretty quick. But an example is the moment where he shrugs and says, "It's only fair considering you looked first." That's a pretty full-on moment. And it just says, "I nearly choke." And now that's fine. That's a summary of the action. But what you could also do is show that moment where she nearly chokes. Is she sipping her wine? Does she nearly spit it out? Like, what does "I nearly choke" actually look like? Like, that's a broad summary that could mean a lot of things. And, you know, if we're watching a movie, what exactly does that look like? Sometimes you're going to have to skip over that stuff just for word count. But you've mentioned it. So clearly it's important that she's had that reaction, and therefore it might be important to fully show it.
Yeah, I feel like this is a general comment about writing, is that it is counterintuitively maybe a visual medium, because what you're always doing is painting a picture, almost creating a movie in the mind of the reader. And whenever you have something that is a little bit ambiguous that the reader can interpret in more than one way, like sometimes you want them to be able to do that, or sometimes you want them to be able to think about a specific thing happening and visualize that in the same way as you want to. So with something like "I nearly choke," there are multiple ways you can imagine that happening. Like they just kind of choke off to the side, or maybe they spray their drink out all over the place. And all of those have different connotations for the scene. And you can tell your reader, make a choice. How do you want this to play out? How do you think that might look? And whatever they choose might have implications for the next line. And what you risk is the next line doesn't gel with what they've imagined to happen. So that's something to be conscious of, that if you are trying to go from one beat to the next beat to the next beat and you have an ambiguous line, it may not lead some readers directly to that next line.
Yeah, and I mean, it doesn't have to be a lot more words. I'm not saying like, let's now dwell in this moment of her nearly choking. Like it can just be the same number of words or just a couple more where she's like, "My wine catches in my throat," and it sprays. Like, I don't know. Like it's but that's now a visual, right? That's a specific visual. And I think that's all I'm saying. Like I don't need to linger there. It's like, well, what exactly was that moment is what I'm suggesting there.
What do you think about this dialogue in general in the story?
Look, I'll say I found it hard to read when I was reading the story aloud, and I don't know if that's just me because I'm awkward. But yeah, I'm not sure why. What do you think? What's your feeling?
Sometimes we give the critique for dialogue that it doesn't really go anywhere or it's not really for a purpose. I felt this dialogue was for a purpose and it was fairly natural. There wasn't a whole lot of just filler dialogue. And some of these phrases are very laden with meaning and emotion. Like, so you're just stood there watching, you know, it's quite heavy. Yeah, exactly. There's a lot in there. And because I watched you read the story, like, some of these you're not quite sure how to read them or what the tone is. That's difficult to do sometimes. But I thought it was quite good dialogue from that perspective. It was pushing towards, I guess, a goal, and every line seemed to have that in mind.
Well, and look, maybe it's a case of maybe removing some of that stage direction in the dialogue and just letting it speak for itself to some extent. So we have this half mortified, half delighted, I say, "You are very forward." Could she not just say, "You are very forward"? You know, "You're very forward." He's like, I like the show too. You don't need to give us the build up.
Right. And also that he replies softly, I've learned not to waste time. Like that can really be cut down.
Yeah, just I've learned not to waste time.
Yeah.
That line speaks for itself. So yeah, maybe that's an element there, Jenny, as well, of trusting your reader a little bit, letting them just experience that dialogue. And I think to some extent readers will experience it slightly differently, but all of those experiences will be satisfying. Like when I read that, that'll be laden with people I know and experiences I've had and people I've talked to, and those voices will be coming through when I'm reading this. And that might be slightly different to the way you read it, Ed, and you hear, maybe I hear him as more confident and you hear him as more timid or whatever it might be, but that's my experience now. I get to have that of this story, and you don't necessarily need to hold my hand through that. We're just watching like these two people interact, and it's like a satisfying experience in itself. We don't need to sort of be told how we're supposed to feel about what they're saying. And similarly, you know, at the end of this section, this moment where it says, I sit quietly, my heart unexpectedly light, to me, that's very telling. You're telling us how we're supposed to feel about this moment. You could leave us with, like, a man who understands the art of good timing. That in itself tells us a lot. You know, she's not ready to go any further than that, but she's still thinking of him in that way. And then we cut to the next scene.
Yeah. So in this next scene, we get this this moment where she becomes the exhibitionist. So wiggling my toes on the dewy grass, I stare at the shower head, hanging ominously untouched since the summer of Jacob's death, cobwebs thicker than the ones on my vagina, hover in the corner. And that's a fun line.
That's such a drop-dead Fred moment.
Yeah. I'll also say it is a bit of a change in tone for me. Like it stood out as just like a bit of a funny image in the middle of, I guess, what was not a funny moment. She's kind of thinking about the fact that she hasn't, you know, touched this shower since that time, and she's thinking about doing it, but we're kind of stuck on the cobwebs in the vagina in that moment. So
no, I think you're right there. If you did want to keep it and you're keeping that, I guess it's an essence of character voice to some extent if they're still having a laugh in this moment. So that's an option. I tend to agree with you that maybe it's something that, even though it's funny, might not be quite fitting of the tone. But if you were going to keep it, a little tip that I don't know where I read it, but I love this tip and I think about it constantly when it comes to comedy, but is to save the punchline to the last bit of the sentence, the end of the sentence. So we have cobwebs thicker than the ones on my vagina hover in the corner. In the corner is the end of that sentence, and that's not the funny bit. You would say, there's cobwebs in the corner thicker than the ones on my vagina. And that's where you end that sentence. I mean, that's by the by, because I'm not sure that we're trying to be like as comedic here, but just a little hot tip I picked up somewhere along the way. I do think it helps the comedy land.
Or maybe you can rephrase that as something a little bit more subtle, like observing the cobwebs and then reflecting somehow on the vagina without explicitly calling it out in a way that the reader can understand. Like there's that option as well.
Yeah, true. And as we're coming up to this climactic moment here, we are getting a little bit more of that naming of emotion kind of stuff. And like there's some very obvious moments where that happens. Timidity, sadness, confidence and excitement swirl like static.
I think when you are trying to build empathy on the part of your reader, it is difficult for a reader to really empathize with three separate emotions swirling around like that. So, I mean, not to harp on this because we've already talked about naming an emotion, but I guess that's the danger. When you name a complex emotion, it's hard to be empathetic to that when it is quite abstract. You're better off focusing in on that action and just let them connect with the scene directly rather than kind of through your authorial layer of telling them how that character is feeling.
And look, this is all very interesting. You know, I love talking about writing, but I also want to talk about a couple of little like more erotic fiction specific things. So one, and again, this sort of comes from my experience now of editing some of these stories for the collection. We've got this line here, my body quivers from head to toe. Now, this is an important piece of action. You know, we're building towards a climax here. But I would say, very funny. I would say watch out for that kind of idiomatic phrasing when we're talking about something that is like the climax of the story. We're leaning now on a phrase we've heard 1,000 times before, from head to toe. And that feels like a summary. It doesn't feel special and inviting and enticing and like compelling. It just feels like an explanation.
I agree. And also that kind of phrasing is something that you would see when you are trying to avoid explicit detail. And the previous paragraph has a fair amount of explicit detail. There's like finger down to my clit, tracing tight circles ever so slowly.
Go on.
So there is explicitness there. So it's not like Jenny's shying away from talking about it. So I think there is an opportunity to escalate. And if that situation is escalating and we're getting to that moment, then describe that moment in more explicit terms as well.
And it's hard because I think this is the part, and Jenny's saying this is the first time she's done this. We don't normally necessarily talk like that or even think like that. Like you might have that moment, but you're not necessarily analyzing it and like what is happening in my body while this moment is happening. But as a writer, that's what you've got to do. You've got to reflect back and go, what physical thing is happening in that moment? Like what's happening in my body? What does that feel like? Not just quivers from head to toe, but like specifically.
And I think as a reader, that is what is exciting, is to have that experience mirrored back in a way that you haven't thought about it before.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's the case for all writing, but I think all the more important here, this sensory experience of what it's like to have an orgasm is like, that's what people came here for. And so I think it pays to think a little bit more deeply about that and deliver that, because that's a big part of the package. And we move on 2 nights later, we've got some lovely sensory detail again. That's your secret, the sensory detail. What does it smell like? What does it sound like? You know, what does it taste like? Like what are all the senses that are happening in this moment? Like not all at once when we don't want to overdo it. Yeah. But what is one specific little tiny detail that encapsulates that feeling? And I think that's the kind of thing to strive for.
So coming up, there's one little line that as Amanda was reading the story, we wanted to kind of come back to and talk about. And that was, consumed by a single thought, I fuck my clit, purposely imagining someone who isn't Jacob. So what are your thoughts about this line, Amanda?
I will say fuck my clit was a bit of a jackknife kind of moment for me when I was reading the story. It's not a descriptor I would ever use. Like it just didn't feel quite right to me. And so I found it very distracting. Yeah. Yeah. What about you?
It's a moment that made me think, okay, so tonally, like the word clit has come up before in this story. It's not like new or anything. And then the word fuck is not new either. I don't think we talk about clits in the context of them being fucked.
No.
And that's an interesting thought. And that's what I'm saying. It made me think about things. I remember listening.
You went somewhere very new in your mind palace.
No, I remember listening to a podcast many years ago, like a sex-based podcast, and it featured like a lesbian and a gay man talking about sex. And at one point, the lesbian was talking about fucking another woman, and the gay man was like, "That's not fucking. Like, that's not what.
Let me show
means.
you."
And no, because we have an idea that fucking means penetration.
Yeah.
And that's kind of baked into it, right? And so when you talk about fucking a clit, it's different. And immediately we think that's not fucking.
It jars.
But it's also like, but it is also.
Yeah.
For me, that line reframed or helped make me reconsider what that means and what my assumptions are about it. So I thought that was interesting, but I also think that's not necessarily what you want to be thinking about in that moment. So maybe that's like you say a jackknife or a little bit of an issue, because it does take you out of that moment.
I would call it jarring. Yeah. Definitely. And you're free to describe things however you want, but at the same time, if you're thinking about the reader's experience, you have to think about that stuff and how that's going to land. And for me, it didn't land perhaps in the way it was intended.
What I will say it does emphasise is, and this is from my experience writing my own flesh fiction story, thinking about how the voice might change depending on the heightened level of enthusiasm of the protagonist. So if the protagonist is kind of warming up or not really into it, they might use certain words, but if they're really like close, then they might be just like. So what that highlights to me is that in that moment, that protagonist is really into it, and that's what they're kind of thinking. They're thinking in terms of like, fuck my clit, not just more delicate kind of terms. So
no, you're right. I mean, I think definitely like the aggression or whatever you might, with the intensity of the wording is definitely what you're searching for there. Another point that comes up for me, and this is just an opportunity, right? Like if I'm getting into the weeds on it, there's a moment further down where she's reading the note from Cooper that he's left on the back table, which is great, by the way. Love that. Love that he just comes, leaves a note, and walks away. Like this is all great yearning. Love it. But in his note, he says, "Come join me, not for a new beginning, but for a moment in time with an open ending." And that's really great. And what I would say is that's an opportunity to feed that line back into their dialogue as if he's referencing something they've already talked about. Because just in the previous scene, it ends with her saying, "He holds my arm, letting me know he's ready for more." I'm not. And I think we could have used that line about a new beginning there.
Yeah.
And so he's correcting that moment where maybe he suggested a new beginning and she reacted. And this is the kind of moment that I think does need to be dramatized, right? Where he holds my arm, letting me know he's ready for more. I'm not. Show me how she's not. Like, don't tell me I'm not. Show me that. Have him say something about a new beginning. Have her react negatively. That's a huge moment of conflict that deserves to be played out.
Yeah.
That would be satisfying, for a reader. Like, oh no, what's happened now? Like we thought they were going to get together and now right near the end, like it's all fallen away because he said new beginning and she wasn't ready for that. Like that deserves all of that dramatization. And then for him to, in his note, reference back to that and sort of be like, not for a new beginning, just for a moment in time with an open ending, that would land even harder, I feel. So that's just an opportunity because I do love that note and I love what it says. It's just like, let's weave it back in and make it land even harder.
Yeah.
Just as an overarching comment, again, back to the sexy stuff, right? And I mean, this would apply in a non-sexy story as well. And you've said this many times, Ed, that things should be building towards a climax, not sort of lingering in that same space. And I do think there were moments where we were sort of lingering maybe a little too long in that same emotional experience. And it would have been nice to sort of build, have it all come crashing down in that moment and then resolve it in the end and then come back harder for that climax kind of thing. So that would be an opportunity as well.
Yeah. Look, and I feel let's move on to the ending and talk about that. And we did speak a little bit about that with Elise. And I guess just on that point you made about the climax, I feel like a part of this, a big part of this is this whole emotional state of mind that the protagonist is in, and can she move beyond, I guess, her grief to the point where she can continue her life. And we have this other character that comes into play and we spend a lot of time, a lot of sexy time, should be said, lingering on that and this whole will they, won't they idea. But we don't get that payoff. We don't get that climax and we don't see them hook up.
Yeah.
And that's a choice, right? And we do see her emotional payoff in the end. Like we see that she's been able to move on in some way. But we, as readers of erotic fiction, don't get that sexual payoff.
Yeah,
really.
I mean, there's sexual moments all through the story and it's like the earlier parts are hotter than the climax itself. Yeah. And I would have loved to have seen, I feel the same way, like I wanted more at that ending. I wanted it to lead to that moment. And it's difficult. It is a question mark because, this story is really about the grief and the letting go. And you don't want to lose that emotional heart of this story. And I don't think you need to lose it. But I think that moment of letting go needs to be much more wrapped up in the sensory experience of the mind-blowing sex that they have after all this build-up. And it's interesting because, again, in editing some of these stories, what I was often looking for, we've got sex, but we didn't have emotion. And in this story, we've got the emotion, but not the sex right at the end there. And I think you need both.
Yeah, maybe the way to think about it is that the story needs a payoff and the sex needs a payoff and they have to kind of line up.
That's what I was finding in the stories. It's like we need the character's emotional arc, whatever that might be, and we also need the arc of the story, the sex, the plot. Those two things both need to climax at the same time, for it to be as satisfying as possible. Like, quite sincerely, I think you can have one or the other if you want, but I think for a very, very resonant piece of erotic fiction, you've got both together.
And it's not easy to climax at the same time.
Oh, really? Is it a challenge, is it?
I mean, at the exact same time.
Okay.
I'd say.
No comment. Anyway, so just on that as well, and we did talk about this with Elise, but that moment at the end of it all washing down the drain. And I will be editing this story with Jenny, and I think that's something that I'd like to look at is, while I think it's powerful to have this big moment of it all like changing, like that bit I love, so we don't want to remove that. But I think it needs to just shift into something a little bit more different. Not like it's all washed away, but that we've leveled up somehow. We're getting to a new place of comfort with something that's been uncomfortable for some time. So
yeah, and I think that's all you can ask for really when you say new place of comfort. In that final sentence, it's letting go of everything. It's a neat little bow. And I don't think you can really expect that. I think it's more just like we've moved to a new level, whatever that level is.
And it can just be a tiny moment, right? Yeah. Like just that tiny bit of relief. She's been dealing with this back and forth and like, am I ready? Am I not ready? And it's just that moment of like, Okay. I think I'm ready to start thinking about this.
But I think it's also an opportunity because in a flash fiction story, as you always say, the dominoes knocking over, in an erotic fiction story, you have like at your fingertips, so to speak,
Pay the jar.
method. That's pretty good.
That circled the rim, that one.
Satisfying. You have at your fingertips a ready-made method for making that happen. It's the sex. Like that's how it happens. And if you can have that sex scene and describe it, and then the payoff comes as a result of that.
Yeah,
I think that's
that release.
available to you.
Yeah. And I think what's also great in this story, and which Elise mentioned as well, is that we also have this thought of her, now she's becoming the exhibitionist. So that's happening at the same time too. But that happens a little bit pre-climax here. She's got her own sort of climax that happens back there where she's being an exhibitionist. And then we have the moment with him. And I feel like they kind of need to happen together to be as satisfying as possible. That exhibitionism of her like really letting go in every way kind of needs to all happen at the same time.
Yeah, like maybe with her joining him in the shower session kind of thing. Yeah, I agree with that because it's both tied in together.
But yeah, like I feel like what we've been dwelling in this whole conversation is like the detail. Like we've become invested in this character now, and we are looking at the nuance and the detail and how opportunities and all of that sort of stuff, which is the sign of a great story for us to be that invested. And this was a great story. As we said, it got cut. It was so close to the long list. And it was really fucking cute as well as being hot. It was really cute, these moments between them. And I loved it. I really loved this story a lot. And yeah, like I'm really excited to publish it. I think it's a great story.
Yeah, I think it was great from the outset in terms of the premise and getting us into the character. And I really love an erotic story that also has a strong emotional core that's not just like, let's fuck.
Yeah.
As much as I love that as well. I think of all the stories that we chose for the long list and the podium and the winners, if you go back and listen to the winners episode, you'll see that all of those stories had a really strong emotional core. And what this one also had is some great sex. Like I really enjoyed the sex scenes. And I think what we miss, and we both expressed it, is at the end, we want to see kind of those things come together and give us the climax that we've been promised.
Yeah.
So,
and speaking as a woman over 40, Jenny, you mentioned that you wanted to normalise sex for women over 40. I think this story did a great job of that. Yeah. It was really hot and, no one's questioning at any moment whether she belongs in this scene or not. And I think it was a really beautiful story in that sense.
And I'm a great fan of sex
women
with
over 40
as well. So, but thank you so much, Jenny, for your story. And hopefully this has given you a little bit of insight. It was a lot of fun for us to read and talking about it. This was a new experience for both of us, really talking about a sexy story in this level of detail. So hopefully you got something out of it because we definitely did.
Oh, hi.
And we always say with our daredevils that it takes a lot of bravery and perhaps masochism to sign up for a daredevil. And I feel like that is amplified about 100 times for a daredevil.
Absolutely.
We're not talking about only your merits as a writer and your artistic merits, but perhaps also some of your deepest desires. And I don't know if this is your deepest desires, Jenny, but we assume.
But this is the thing, right? You put yourself out there, you'll make a connection with people out there who are like you, And I think that when you put out a piece of erotic fiction, there will be readers for that who will enjoy it. I did enjoy this story. I'm happy to say that. So absolutely 100 times braver. And I'm glad you got your girlfriends around you. I hope they're all cheersing you. This is absolutely a moment of celebration.
So thanks again, Jenny. And we hope that you're not left too fragile to fuck after this Baredevil beating.
But just before we go, we've asked our resident Dom to come in and give you a little bit of a verbal spanking because we know really that's what you came here for. So take it away, Elise.
Jenny, you are a terrible tease. Shame on you. When you give me a funny title, I expect you to be silly and frivolous. None of this moving, heartfelt art. Go stand in the corner until I decide how to punish you.
So thank you, Elise, and we hope you're okay after that little spanking, Jenny. But we'll be back next week with our second Baredevil. And until then, ride on.
Right on.
We hope you enjoyed this special Daredevil episode of Not Quite Right. If you have thoughts on this story, follow us on social media and join the conversation. And if you'd like to participate in the next round of the competition, head over to our website at notquiteright.com. That's WRITE.
Something doesn't seem quite right.
What does it smell like? What does it sound like? What does it taste like? Like, what are all the senses that are happening in this moment? Like, not all at once, when we don't want to overdo it.
Yeah.
But what is one specific little tiny detail that encapsulates that feeling? And I think that's the kind of thing to strive for. Anyway.
That was good. You're like, deliver that package.
I didn't even listen to myself. If you want, you can go straight to the fuck my clip.
Yeah.
Missed. Help.